Good evening. I'm Bob Schwartz from the Gay Liberation Network. This is a program that's a part of the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Consortium series on CAN TV. Welcome to the show. Tonight we're going to be talking about Palestinian oppression, pinkwashing, and the boycott that's been organized to support the Palestinian people in their struggle. Our guest tonight is Jason Tompkins, and I'll be handing the program over to him in just a moment. I'd like to bring to your attention the website of the Gay Liberation Network, which is gayliberation.net, and our email address, lgbtliberation@aol.com. Please contact us and go with any questions, and go to our webpage for more information about our organization. A little bit of backstory here to our program tonight, and this is a call-in show, but please give us about 10 minutes so we can get into our topic before making any phone calls. Since, and actually before, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1947-48, violence has been used to establish the state, to oppress the Palestinians, and to expand the state to its present borders. Settlements are still going on within the land that's supposed to be a Palestinian state at some future date. And the United States government continues to support the Israeli state with large amounts of money and the political support of Obama, Romney, virtually every member of Congress. In spite of this, the State of Israel has taken a number of hits in recent years. Its image has become tarnished, I think deservedly so, by its violence against the Palestinian people. So what the Israeli government decided to do in 2005 is to launch a marketing campaign called Brand Israel. The campaign sought to depict Israel as relevant and modern. The government later expanded the marketing plan to harness the gay community in Israel to reposition its global image. In 2011, the Tel Aviv Tourism Board began a campaign to the tune of some $90 million to brand the city as an international gay vacation destination. The promotion, which receives support from the tourism ministry and Israel's overseas consulates, includes depictions of young same-sex couples frolicking on beaches, it also includes the financing of pro-Israeli movie screenings at lesbian and gay film festivals in the United States. The growing global gay movement against the Israeli occupation has named these tactics of harnessing the gay communities in Israel and aiming this propaganda at gay people in the U.S. as pinkwashing. This is a deliberate strategy to conceal the continuing violation of Palestinians' human rights behind an image of modernity signified by Israeli gay life. A law professor at Tel Aviv University argues that gay rights have become a public relations tool, even though conservative and especially religious politicians remain fiercely homophobic. So, as I mentioned today, our guest is Jason Tompkins, who is a member of GenderJust and a general community activist. And I wanted to ask Jason why you and some others, including a couple of people from Gay Liberation Network, recently protested the showing of two gay-themed Israeli films at the Center on Halsted, which is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender center here in Chicago. Why was this protest held?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for having me on. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit and give people some background on the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. This was a mandate and a call that was put out from Palestinian civil society organizations, a very vast coalition of over 170 different Palestinian civil society organizations. We're talking about nurses unions and teachers and farmers and self-determined LGBTQ Palestinian groups that all called for, in July of 2005, called for the international community to support Palestine by engaging in a boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. So since that call has been made in 2005, there's been a very vast and very diverse outpouring all over the world of all sorts of these campaigns. And particularly, as you were mentioning before, this kind of pinkwashing movement that really focused on calling out this kind of brand Israel queer framing and promotion of Israel has really gone on in terms of really boycotting arts festivals, film festivals that, again, were being sponsored by and being brought to us by the State of Israel. And so with this context, when we heard that Chicago's Festival for Israeli Cinema was going to be partnering with the Center on Halsted, which is the LGBT center that we have here in Chicago, that they were going to be partnering and doing an event to screen two particular films, myself and a huge, diverse group of LGBT organizers here in the city, a very ad hoc, horizontal group of folks, from people representing organizations like American Friends Service Committee, Jewish Voice for Peace, Punks Against Apartheid. We all just kind of got together and said that we really didn't want this happening in our name. And so, someone who happens to know a lot of the higher ups at Center on Halsted actually secured a meeting for us with Julie Walther, who's Director of Programming at the center, along with the CEO, Tico Valle. And so we did meet face to face with their leadership, really making our case and really making it clear that by hosting this event, by a festival that gets huge sponsorship dollars from the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest, as well as the Ministry of Tourism of Israel, along with pro-Israel organizations like Friends of IDF, who happened to have their fundraising banquet this past Monday downtown, as well as many other organizations. By colluding with this organization and by supporting this event, you are not supporting dialogue. You're not supporting any kind of progress towards justice, that you're actually turning the conversation into this kind of false, neutral event. And so we made that case. We gave both Tico and Julie, extensive information around the history of the boycott. And coming out of that meeting, they did not make any commitments to cancel the event or to pull their sponsorship from the festival. So a lot of us decided to organize a call action. So the Friday before the screening, approximately 60 folks called into the Center on Halsted to really make it clear that we were not okay with the center hosting this event and having this kind of collusion with the occupation that the State of Israel perpetuates in our name. So approximately 60 people called in, left messages on Tico and Julie's voicemail, left messages at the front desk, emails, the whole 9 yards, and that action was definitely felt in a very strong way. Yet and still, the center decided to continue on with the protest, and so that's why on last Thursday, approximately 16 or 17 of us showed up in the rain with our pink pom-poms and T-shirts and our cheerleading slogans to really make our presence known, that we were not okay with the Center of Halsted in particular as the epicenter of the LGBT community in the city, to be colluded and to be kind of co-opted by this pinkwashing process. So that was the idea behind the event.
I think it's really, really important to speak out. I know in New York at the center there, a group that met there once or twice, I think, that was organizing support for Palestinians, was forced out by people who didn't want any Palestinian voice to be heard there, and so it was excluded, and the LGBT Center in New York still excludes this Palestinian, this gay. I mean, these are LGBT people who make up this solidarity committee. They still can't meet at the supposedly gay center in New York. So it's really important to get this word out. There isn't much debate in the United States. As I mentioned earlier, the Congress, the presidential candidates, everybody's falling over himself and herself to see who can be the loudest in their support for Israel and who can promise to give the most money, completely ignoring the oppression of the Palestinian people. There are people in the U.S., as Jason has indicated, including some Jews, who are speaking out. But it's a problem getting this voice out. When he spoke to Congress last May, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the Middle East is a region where women are stoned, gays are hanged, and Christians are persecuted. Now, no doubt there are some issues in these areas mentioned by Netanyahu, but what's driving his statement? What do you think is behind it?
Well, and it's an interesting moment right now to look at the state of Palestine, and I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I do pay attention to the news, and I do know that Jimmy Carter, who's done a lot of foreign policy work, there was just a story about him last week saying how with Netanyahu in power, he's very kind of disappointed and kind of, as is a lot of people within the movement, demoralized around the possibility of this two-state solution, which has kind of been the main argument that's been going on for the past couple of decades, that negotiations and that work, during the Clinton administration, there were supposed to be talks and negotiation toward a two-state resolution. But the reality is, that's pretty much off the table in terms of any kind of real response. But to speak really clearly about, again, this whole idea of brand Israel, because a lot of people may hear well, it's a good thing that governments are spending money on, gay tourism and this and that and gay visibility. What's important to understand is that we cannot brand or build or buy our way into peace and justice. And we all should know this by now. And the reality, when we talk about, or when it's said that, gay people in general are better off in Tel Aviv than in any other part of the Middle East, we have to really be specific about what we're talking about. The reality for a lot of LGBT Palestinians and Palestinian groups that have been very vocal in their work continue to remind the world that, for example, a lesbian Palestinian woman who grows up in that society and gets married to a man and has children because of societal pressures, to ask her to just run away to Tel Aviv or London or Paris or Milan, for that matter, and leave behind that olive grove that she inherited from her family that was a source of income for her, and leave behind her children and jump right into a society that is extremely hostile and extremely societally racist on a societal level, to deal with a very hostile asylum process that's pretty much impossible to navigate, to deal with all of these intense pressures that in no way address, the actual societal and economic inequalities that are going on, to ask her to do that and to call that a social justice achievement just makes zero sense. So what we know from LGBT Palestinian organizations that have been doing this work and bringing the word out, we know that, the right to return for Palestinians that have been expelled from their land, the end of the occupation, these are women's issues. These are LGBTQ issues for those that are directly impacted by it. And that's what well-meaning, well-intentioned folks all over the world, here in the United States, really need to think about in terms of our place in all of this. Because obviously, if for nothing else, as taxpayers, we support the occupation. I mean, Obama has committed approximately, I believe, $30 billion to the Israeli Defense Forces. If for nothing else, we need to really locate our own place in this and clearly take a stand against this.
Yeah. I think it's important to point out that while advances have been made for LGBT people in Israel, this didn't happen because the government was pro-gay rights. This happened, and I got this from an Israeli filmmaker to whom I put a question after looking at his film. This happened because lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people organized from below and made demands on the government. That's why these rights, the advancements that have been made in Israel have occurred. And the same, of course, is true here or anywhere else. You need to organize and make demands on power.
Precisely, and to that point, all this money that's going into this Brand Israel work. I mean, I was doing a little research, and when this kind of Brand Israel project got going, I mean, they created a brand management office for the state of Israel that was funded originally in 2007 to the tune of $4 million for that year alone. You talked about the $80 million, $90 million that has gone into this project. You have to understand that money doesn't go into actual justice work. That's a very far cry from the reality on the ground for LGBT people of all ethnicities that are living within the borders of Israel.
Yeah, I'd like to mention now that this is a call-in show, or mentioned for a second time, and if you have calls, we are ready to take them at this time. Let's talk a little bit about the boycott, okay? Yeah. We have information about groups that can be contacted, and perhaps, Jason, you could talk a little bit about what the groups are doing in terms of the boycott of Israeli products and cultural events.
Yes, the conversation around boycotts, divestment, and sanctions is very broad and very diverse. Within that, there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions and a lot of different approaches to that work. But I did want to point out some local organizations that are doing work here. Chicago Divests is a really great organization that's really focusing on divesting from multinational and U.S.-based corporations that are profiting from the occupation. So in particular, there's the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association and College Retirement Equities Fund, which is known as a very kind of socially conscious retirement fund provider. But unfortunately, this company, on behalf of their clients, for their investment portfolios, they invest approximately $1.5 billion in corporations that profit from the occupation. So we're talking about Hewlett-Packard, which provides biometric scanners at checkpoints to judge a person's racial or ethnic background at a checkpoint. We're talking about Motorola, which gives the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, surveillance systems, communication systems that they use to surveil and detain Palestinians at checkpoints in the occupied territories, in refugee camps. We're talking about Caterpillar, which is the world-known bulldozer company that the Israeli government uses to go in and bulldoze housing from Israelis. So Chicago Divest is doing a lot of amazing work to really shut that down. We also have Jewish Voice for Peace, which they're at the bottom, which here the Chicago chapter is actually really, really amazing. Rabbi Brant Rosen in Evanston is on the Rabbinical Council of the Jewish Voice for Peace. And I forget the name of it, but he has an amazing book out, just kind of talking about his journey, as a rabbi into supporting Palestinian solidarity. And he's been really at the head of the movement in a lot of ways here in Chicago. And of course, we have Students for Justice in Palestine, their Chicago chapter, who they have various different groups all over the Chicago colleges and universities, DePaul, Northwestern, UIC. And they actually have a conference going on this very weekend, a national conference, really looking at the ways that students and other folk kind of involved in the academic world can get involved in the movement. So those are just some resources locally that you can kind of plug into, no matter who you are, no matter, what you do, what community you're a part of. But I really also just want to stress the point that BDS is a tactic. It's an instrument. It's not a movement. It's a tactic and an instrument that movements use. BDS has been used throughout space and time, in many different ways, from the civil rights movement, during apartheid South Africa. We all know that this is a tactic that's important, that has been used by so many different social justice movements, and that is effective. And that's why it's important that folks engage with it in any way that they see fit. It doesn't matter if you're an artist, a writer, a faith leader. There's a way for you to kind of look into the issues, look back, do a little research yourself, and look back into the original boycott call that was made by Palestinian civil society in 2005, and think about ways that you can kind of engage and act from there.
When you say BDS, now break that down.
Boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
Okay,
yes.
Right.
Yes.
I well remember the boycott and the divestments and the sanctions that went on to bring about the change in South Africa. And there was a lot of controversy about that, but the people who supported the boycott and divestment campaign persisted and helped put the pressure on the regime there, the minority white regime, to bring about a necessary first step.
Yes.
In the liberation of South Africa. There's certainly a lot more of work that needs to be done there.
Yes. And I think it's also important to really point out that it's well documented at this point what the human rights abuses are that Palestine is experiencing, from the Human Rights Watch to the United Nations, in well-reputed news sources like Haaretz, all over the world, Al Jazeera. It's at a point now where we really need to inform ourselves and we need to act. And this isn't a conversation that can simply be debated. The reality is for Palestinians that are living this day-to-day reality, that are being expelled from their homes, that are having their property destroyed, that are forced to live in refugee camps under high surveillance, under high detained realities, that are being dispossessed economically, socially, in every shape and way possible. This is a very urgent and very time-sensitive point that we're at right now in the movement, and it is important that people educate themselves, but not only educate themselves, but think about ways that they can act. Because, like I was saying before, it doesn't just affect those people over there across seas, whatever. It definitely has a real impact on us as U.S., if for nothing else, as U.S. taxpayers. I'll think about all of the taxpaying money that is being used, to provide all this defense spending and all this militarism for Israel that is not going into our own communities, that's not going into any kind of real resource that's making a difference for us here at home. So we need to really think about this in terms of the way that, and locate our own selves in this whole situation, because we are implicated.
Yeah, this is a really important point. We need to get involved because there are justice issues at stake. And we also need to get involved because money that we need right here is going to support this killing in Palestine. And that's something that, more people in the United States need to be made aware of. A lot of people just don't know how their tax dollars are being spent to support this oppression in the Middle East.
And if I may, I wanted to speak just a bit on the cultural and academic component.
Very quickly.
on the boycott, because a lot of people have a hard time with that, where they say, well, aren't you censoring? Aren't you silencing debate? Aren't you silencing artists? And the reality is, like I was saying before, these BDS instrument has been used by artists throughout time and space, whether it's, Josephine Baker saying that she doesn't want to play to segregated audiences. The BDS campaign, as far as culture and as far as scholarship is concerned, is really about asking artists, filmmakers, curators, as well as audiences and patrons and students, to locate themselves in this situation and to really take a principled stance. It's not about censoring anyone at all.
Okay. On that note, we will conclude. I want to thank you for viewing our program tonight. I want to thank Jason Tompkins from GenderJust for appearing on our show. With that, good night, and we'll see you next time.